Bonsoir.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming out, and thank you to the festival for organizing this evening, and thank you for this wonderful film. Nicolas von Leffen and Jakob Karlsauer, the two directors, are in the hall, and I think we can applaud them. Now, I suggest that we call the panel participants up onto the stage. I see that you're very interested in them and in Lebanon because there are many of you in the room. Dina Hajjar represents Caritas Switzerland in Lebanon. She's Lebanese and she lives in Lebanon. And Caritas is a partner of this evening's session. We thank Caritas for their support, and thank you, Dina, for coming. Now I'd like to call Peter Harling. Peter's a friend of mine, but more importantly, he's the founder of a think tank, an atypical think tank based in Lebanon called Synaps. Synaps works on public policy and subjects that don't get a lot of attention in Lebanon: water, electricity, daily life in all its aspects, banking. Thank you for coming, Peter. Sabyl Ghoussoub is a writer. He's also a friend of mine. He's the author of Beirut sur Seine, which won the Goncourt Prize awarded by high school students. He divides his time between Paris and Lebanon, and he has a lot of resilience. We'll be talking about resilience this evening. We talk a lot about resilience when we talk about Lebanon, and it irritates the Lebanese. And I'd like to welcome Andrea Fahed, who's the protagonist of the film, and she's online. You can see her on the screen now. She's going to be taking part remotely in the panel discussion. Thank you, Andrea. A dancer, she's a dancer and a therapist, a dance therapist. To begin, could I ask Dina Hajjar to tell us a bit about the social situation in Lebanon as Caritas sees it in their daily work on the ground? You said it's very difficult. You've never seen anything like it, anything like what's happening now. What is happening now, Dina? Good evening, everyone, first of all, and thank you again for inviting me. Sorry, microphone is too far away from my mouth. What we're seeing on the ground, well, you just saw the stories of 4 people who saw and experienced the port explosion and the consequences that are still with them today. There are thousands of similar stories. What we saw this evening was very powerful, and I'm glad that Andrea is with us because we've become familiar with her story, and we're interested to see what else she has to say. I can tell you that we met the family who are the parents of a nurse who went to work on that day, on the 4th of August. Her shift was starting at 7 p.m., but she went in early to be able to chat with her colleagues. And she's no longer with us. And when we met her parents a month ago, nearly 5 years after the blast, we talked to the father who came home from work. He has been through a lot of crises in Lebanon. The mother was there as well. And she whispered with a smile on her face, she was young, she was young, she was young. So nearly 5 years after the blast, we're still seeing scenes like this. And besides the explosion, since 2021, we've had all sorts of crises, and more recently, the war has entered Lebanon. I don't think anyone has escaped the trauma of the explosion. It was a collective trauma. I think you can call it that. If you're familiar with Beirut, it's a very lively city. But after the explosion, there was a deathly silence. And we recently, the war came to Lebanon, and those who were there didn't escape that trauma either. As we see in the film, there are children who are extremely troubled and, like Aya, go through, have feelings of terror daily. Imagine children like Aya who went through the explosion and then regained a bit of hope, and then the war broke out with the bombs, the bombings, the trauma that stemmed from that. What I've seen after 11 years working in the humanitarian field is that Lebanon goes from one crisis to another. Since the explosion, the revolution, the economic crisis, we've seen the drug crisis, the gas crisis, the electricity crisis, the earthquake that reminded people of the blast on the 4th of August, and now the war. Over 1 million people had to seek refuge elsewhere. So the crises, the cycle is just continuing, and we don't have any solutions for these crises. So the situation is extremely harsh for all those living in Lebanon. Thank you very much. You've just mentioned all of the crises that Lebanon has experienced. Before we come back to those, let me ask you what the film evoked for you, Sabyl, Peter, and maybe Andrea as well. You can tell us how it feels to see the film again for you. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you to the festival for inviting me, and thank you, Christophe, for this discussion. We don't talk about the blast a lot. When we see a film like this, we think maybe it's starting up again. I think the directors are in the room. Can you hear the interpreters? You're getting the English version? Okay. So even though it's a documentary, it reminds me of another film called Une vie suspendue, which is a fiction film made by Justine Sabb, who made a lot of documentaries in the 70s. And in your documentary, I don't know if you know her film, but there are a lot of similar characters. Although she was filming something that happened 45 years ago. And the dialogues in your documentary appear in Justine's film. Should we stay or should we go? There's a painter, there's similar characters. And so it's funny to see that the situation hasn't changed from those films to today. I'm Lebanese. I'm very moved by the film. I'm very moved by Andrea, by everything I've just seen. It's very difficult, and as you rightly said, the war is a continuing trauma for many generations in Lebanon. And so these are generational scars. We knew the war was coming, and it did. So what does the future hold for us? We don't know. We don't ask ourselves if things are going to get better. We don't think so, even though we have a government and there's maybe a false glimmer of hope in the country. But what awaits us now, we don't really know. Peter, what did you feel when you were watching this film? We'll save Andrea for last because she's the guest of honor.
I can tell you what topics in the film resonated in me and I found most striking. First of all, there's the intimacy. This event, this blast, penetrated each and every single individual's intimate life. in a way that's hard to communicate. It's a very physical phenomenon that is out of this world. For a lot of people, it was the tipping point. All of a sudden, your home can be affected by this phenomenon that has no existence in and of itself, has no reason to be. So what can you still trust? And I felt that the scenes in Beirut, the scene on the rooftops that are beautiful in Beirut, and this is something that we don't enjoy as much as we should, helps us look at these intimate lives. I also liked the social diversity. It's something that's really important in working class families. The victims received virtually no support, be it the parents who had to face their own trauma and the trauma of their own children. So you see this family living in an underground parking lot. These were not people who were displaced by the blast. These were people who were living in this garage, in this liminal place, like many people from the working class who are migrants. And their experience of this event is very different from the experience of an individual from another background. So there's a multiplicity of experiences. And then the last thing I wanted to take up is the juxtaposition of experiences that are not shared beyond the group. The Beirut port explosion affects part of Beirut. The paradox is that the silos protected another part of Beirut that did not have this very overwhelming experience, deeply troubling experience. They experienced it in a very different way. They toured Beirut, they took selfies in front of the port, and for them it had a completely different meaning. This problem repeats itself in Lebanon. There's a sort of fragmentation of history, and I find that in the film, the silo is very symbolic. It stops time. It's a sort of limbo. It's half destroyed, but not completely. It's not turned into a memorial either. It burns. It's a scar, a gaping wound. The city's stigma, and nothing is done with these silos. Nothing is done about it. Crises follow each other, and there's not really enough time to recover from one crisis before you have to move on to the next. And I think that's really a topic that we'll have to discuss later. Yes, and this silo is reminiscent of the movie theater on the Martyr Plaza. Now, Andrea, if you'd rather speak English, it's not a problem at all. We've got simultaneous interpretation for you. What's it like seeing all of this again? For you, it's not quite the same thing. It's your own history, and it's continuing. Do you get the feeling it's distant, or it's very close to you?
J'essaie d'un peu écrire, mais
I tried to write down what I thought about. I'll try speaking French, although I'll probably mix a little bit of English. I'll try to translate myself. But first of all, the first word that comes to my mind is nonsense, absolutely nonsensical, absurd to see this blast, this explosion, to experience this event again, given that We've just been through a war. It only ended a few weeks ago, and ending is maybe an exaggeration. So there's the absurdity of what we've experienced. There's our relationship to noise, to sounds. After the Beirut port explosion, I would be startled by loud noises, just like everybody who's been through a similar trauma. There were points in time when I froze.
Mais donc voilà, il y a le côté d'un côté absurde et la relation.
So it seemed nonsensical, and then there was this relationship to noise that was nonsensical too. After having lived through the war, heard the sound of drones, Israeli drones flying over us, it was very difficult to see that again. But there's also general fatigue and tiredness. This is something that you see in Beirut, the way people are on the streets. People feel tired. But in parallel, there's resistance, resilience. We want to celebrate our culture. And I really like the fact that you mentioned the movie theater, because during the revolution, this movie theater was taken up by lots of groups. They organized talks in there, talks with lawyers.
Mais donc en fait, c'était ça.
So we took over the symbol of war, and so that it became part of our culture again. It became part of our resistance. I'd like to come back to what you said, resistance. This panel is entitled Resilience. What's resilience to you? What does it mean to you? Does it mean solidarity? Is it something that's very individualist? Each individual's way of coping? Is it kind of selfishness that is characteristic of Lebanese society in a sense, despite the fact that there is solidarity? People always say the Lebanese are resilient. Is it something that upsets you? Is it something that you feel? Someone in the film says at one point, well, we don't really have a choice. Is that it? Andrea, what do you think about that, since you're where it all takes place? You're at the heart of things. I think it's become a multi-layered word. There are many different ways of interpreting this word, but it's been romanticized very much. As a human being, you have to resist, you have to be resilient, otherwise you die. When anything happens, especially when you have to survive, it affects what makes you human at the core. This is the reason why, when we speak about resilience, there's the romantic aspect. It gives hope. It helps. It brings people together. It brings the people together as it's trying to survive one crisis after the next. Now, we spoke about an earthquake. That's a natural disaster. But in parallel, what's at stake is the political situation. We need to survive. We need to adapt to that. And so in that sense, we resist to what's happening, to what's being done to this region. And it brings me to Syria, to Palestine. It's the entire region that's suffering at the moment. So I tend to have a gut reaction to the word resilience because it was used in a romantic way without getting into the depth of the word, the depth of what it actually means.
C'est la façon de surmonter les traumas.
Yes, it's in the way you survive trauma, right? Yes, and it's a way of saying that we all hurt together. That's resilience. And when we hurt together, okay, fine, we say we hurt, but why? What do we do about it? How do we go beyond this hurt and find a solution together? But just saying that we're resilient in a romantic way, that's forgetting why we need to be resilient. That's the reason why I'd rather say resistance rather than resilient, just because we're Lebanese. No, it's just because we have to.
Sabyl, does this word mean something to you? Does it irritate you? Is it synonymous with something else, or would you reject it? I think it's a word that not a lot of Lebanese people would use. No, I haven't heard a Lebanese person say, I'm resilient. But we have to deal with the word because it's thrown about a lot. In my parents' generation, Andrea's parents and others who went through the war when they were 25, resilience the word wasn't around. No one had a choice. Instead of lasting 6 months, the war lasted 15 years. So people didn't ask themselves the question. If there's no electricity, we find a solution. Same thing for water. The same problems that we have today in Lebanon. Earlier, you were talking about, or Christophe was talking about cinema. You said something. You said that talks were organized in the cinemas. This happened during the revolution in Lebanon. This hasn't really borne fruit yet, but this evolution. But I think the young generation and the generation that came before us said that we have to do something with this anger. I would call it anger. So resilience just means we don't have a choice. We have to live with the war, the lack of water, the lack of petrol. We want to go on to something else now. If we accept the word resilience, and you said it's romanticized, I think that's interesting because that talks about the Lebanese in the world. Lebanese people muddle through wherever they are, wherever in the world they are. We live in a country where there's no state, there's no government. So if you have a problem, go find a Lebanese person. They'll find a solution for you. But for our country's sake, I think we have to try to build something else now, go beyond everything that's happening. I said this at the beginning. Resilience is not a word the Lebanese would use about themselves or in general. Nobody's going to say, I'm resilient. I think everybody's going to say, I'm angry, I'm weary, I'm exhausted, like you said, Andrea. Dina, what does the word resilience mean to you? You work with communities, you work with the most vulnerable sectors of the population, the underprivileged. You see their daily lives, their reality. Is resilience a form of solidarity that steps in because the state is failed? The institutions are not playing their role? Is it a way, is it society's way of taking over from the government? What do you put into this word? Well, I tend to agree with Sabyl and Andrea. What we've seen the communities themselves, and what we've seen is they muddle through. Often they have no choice, so we often see families doing what they have to do to survive throughout the various crises that have affected Lebanon. We hear the word, but we have no choice. We just have to get through it. The parents are doing it for the children. They are not going to let their children die of hunger. So they hide their fear, their fatigue, so that they can contribute to their child's upbringing, survival, and try to enable their child to live a slightly better life than what they had. But if we look at it in more detail, there are 1 million Lebanese citizens that have been displaced by the war that started last autumn between Israel and Hezbollah. How many of those people have come back home? How many no longer have a home? How many are still in temporary shelters or longer-term shelters? How long do you think this is going to last? A year, 2 years, 5 years? Do you have a feeling about this? Because Caritas works on these issues. Give us a bit more detail. Yes, of course. We don't have any statistics, exact statistics, but of course we have families who are still living in schools, displaced and living in schools. And in many cases, their houses have been destroyed. The house in the village, in their village, was destroyed. Sometimes the entire village has been destroyed, says Christophe. Yes, in some cases that's true, says Dina. The other reason is that they don't have any money to go and rent a new flat because of the economic crisis, so they just stay in these schools. So what about the pupils then, and the neighborhood, the neighbors? What about the parents of the pupils if the school can no longer function? No, the school is operating. It's operating. There are some rooms reserved for these families, and on the other floors, the classrooms are there, and they're operating normally. The school directors are doing the best they can to separate the displaced children and the others, to protect them, protect the children who have been displaced. So that's what we see, and that's what I call survival and not so much resilience. It's when you have no other choice. Peter, you are a student of political science. What does this idea or term mean to you? Well, for me, it's about aesthetics, and when we talk about resilience, which we don't use in the same way for other countries, it was built up during the war from 1975 to 1990. Slowly, I mean, the war was not as deadly. It was destructive of the social fabric, but it was also very localized and moving around. It created a sort of limbo for everyone because you had to keep up with where the war was taking place, but life went on fairly normally in this abnormal set of circumstances for 15 years. So this idea of time being suspended became a continuous reality, and people wanted to prove to themselves and to their entourage, their loved ones, and the outside world that the country had vitality, that could endure this suffering whilst preserving its culture. And this gave rise to some very beautiful forms of expression and others that are more morbid. In the years following the war, nightclub was opened in a mass grave site, on a mass grave site. So that was quite typical of Lebanon in a way. Some people thought it was wonderful. Some were very irritated by it. So it's a sort of two sides of the coin, mobilizing, regenerating, raising resources, a lot of solidarity above and beyond the political schisms and religious divisions. But on the other hand, the other side of the coin is this ambiguity, which I think attracts a lot of anger today. Over the years, we've moved from a fairly established idea of resilience to something that's much more controversial today. And what has changed is this idea of, it has to do with finances. The Lebanese have gone through a set of very different crises. The population was good at raising cash and could also count on considerable injections of funds from foreign sources, a lot of political money, and as we know, a lot of it went to armed factions. So with the economic collapse, the banking crisis, today what's happened is that the funding has dried up. So governance will have to, if it's going to be done, has to be done with very little resources. We see this. Everyone in the film is suffering. Even the privileged parts of the population, life has become very, very difficult for them. So the whole aesthetics of it has become quite provocative today. When we were preparing for this session, we were talking about a family at the beginning of the 20th century. Sorry, a famine that killed 1/3 of the population. Is this something that has stayed in the collective consciousness? Is it present in the interactions between social groups? Lebanon is a refuge country. We know how diverse and varied the communities are. It's a very Mediterranean terrain, hostile, arid, very hard to grow anything in, rocky, a lot of hills and mountains. A lot of people have come there to take refuge. This has been difficult. Subsistence agriculture is difficult to carry off. We have this idea that Lebanon is a flamboyant, exuberant country, but its recent past tells a different story. A famine killed 1 Lebanese person out of 3. No families were spared. This was in the 1910s. Foreign academic has written a very serious book about it. This is one of the many episodes that are not talked about. Then there's the war, 1975-1990, which is a sort of lightning rod that comes up whenever we talk about Lebanon's problems. But the pressing problems that are in Lebanon today go back to before the war. The incestuous nature of the banking sector or the other issues. Andrea? Peter was talking about solidarity. From where you stand, as a citizen but also a therapist, do you see solidarity between different religions, social groups, or in the neighborhoods? Are people showing solidarity? I mean, what is the basis for the solidarity, according to you?
Ou alors, les solidarités artistiques.
Or, sorry, I'm cutting in, but solidarity may also be artistic in nature. That's what you told me when we were preparing this session. In Lebanon, I'm the co-founder of an organization who does physical theater and contemporary dance. There's also psychology, so that's part of my daily job, of my daily work. But it has to do more with dancing and education. That's what I like most. And the idea was to resist through dancing, through movement. But just because, it wasn't just because you dance during a dance class. It had to do with movement, with art. It removes all the sectarian and religious elements. We become bodies moving together. That's all we are, bodies. And we take up things that are our own. The participants in Beirut Physical Lab, we ask them to take things from their daily lives, to think about the sounds that they hear, think about the things that they see, During our last performance, we used the idea of drones. We tried to reproduce the sound of drones in our performance. We wanted to take up what we'd experienced for 3 months, or for even longer. During part of the war, I was no longer in Lebanon. But we had this constant sound with us. And these are things that are imposed on us by our history with the civil war that we experienced. And what I also wanted to say is that it's also the war of Israel against Lebanon. I don't know who follows what politically speaking.
D'accord.
But that's it. I know many people in our community who've been affected, who are in parts of Lebanon where there's a lot more of Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is part of Lebanon, whereas Israel is against all the Lebanese. We were all afraid. We were all terrified. We all experienced the terrible day of the pagers. This was something that I could not understand. I understood nothing at all. For at least 2 days or even a week, we had no idea where it would occur again, if it were to occur again. So there's this collective trauma that we all share, and through movement, we resist. I can give you the example of contemporary dance. If I wanted to do that, up till now, I had to go to Europe. But in this instance, I wanted to look at contemporary dance from Lebanon, things that exist in our own bodies. We've inherited things over the years. Our bodies have experiences all these crises, these wars. All of this transformed our bodies. We wanted to take ownership of our own bodies. So the idea is to rebuild individuals before we rebuild society. Is that it? Or society through individual bodies? Yes, I think these are two parallel phenomena. These changes happen in parallel. It's going to take time. This region has been suffering for years and decades. As we said a while ago, my parents experienced the Civil War. I had no idea I'd be living through a war. We've had several wars in the past, but nothing like the one that we had this year. And I think these changes will occur in parallel. So there's the individual change, but there's also working together, collaborating, resisting by collaborating, be it in terms of mental health, education, or in my case, through movement. The idea is to create places and spaces where we can be ourselves, speak up, discover things, and also see things in our group. And we've got more and more participants year after year coming from all corners of Lebanon. They're people whom I don't know at all. I've never spoken to them, but I love them because our bodies speak spontaneously. We don't need words. It's empowering the people and giving tools to the people to be empowered, take it from them.
To translate, sorry.
Peter parlait de rente.
Peter spoke about a cash cow. And I hear you talk about things that have been imposed on you.
Comment dire? L'hypocrisie à dire.
Isn't it hypocritical to say that we, the Lebanese, experience things that we don't want, as if society were made up of all sorts of innocent people, and next to that, they're the baddies imposing things on you, trafficking, they smuggle generators. But there are people living from this, from these things that are imposed on Lebanese society.
importante de la société
an important part of the Lebanese society live off that.
qui
It seems to me, at least.
qui n'est pas toujours. Enfin,
Is
est-ce que la société désire elle-même imposer des règles?
does society want rules for itself, Sabyl?
Je crois, on nous posait souvent la question après.
After October 7th, I was asked this question very often. Now, to answer your question, yes, I think we need to take on responsibility for our mistakes. And what you've said is true. There's the issue of electricity and water. These things must change, but it's hard to change because it's a mafia that is running the country. The protests ask for a total change of leadership. The revolution in 2019 called for a change in leadership, but it's the mafia. How can we do away with it? It's extremely complicated. I don't think we have the necessary weapons to manage that. And as you said, we sometimes accept the situation. There's water, electricity, but there are also domestic workers working in our families. So it's a whole system. It's weird to receive a round of applause when you're an author because I'm clearly not a politician. But these are systems that exist in our families that we accept. We could rise up and say no, and we don't do that. I'm speaking on behalf of the Lebanese, so when will we decide to rise up and say, no, we don't agree with what's happening? And this is something that we don't dare to do. We don't have enough courage. We're not brave enough. And on the other hand, given what Lebanon has gone through these past 4 years, the economic crisis, the Beirut port explosion, the war, we need to rise up. It's hard to say, given the economic crisis, that will continue going down in the streets. Some friends told me there aren't enough of us to ask for justice, but they'd go back home. They had no money, they had no food, no medication. We spoke about resilience. A friend of mine said family is our own means of resilience, and it's true. The only way of having medication, even paracetamol at one point, was to have family abroad that would send you this medication. So it's a system. Who's patient enough, who's got enough energy to go down in the street and protest? The people who were victims of the port explosion will go down in the street to protest. The people who were victims of the war will go down in the street to protest. We all choose our fights and our struggles because there are just too many at the same time, and it's hard to decide which is worth fighting. Dina?
Well, I don't think I'm probably the best person to answer that question or enter the political debate. There are a lot of political aspects to the situation, but what I can add to what Sabyl and Andrea said is that the consequences can be seen in every community throughout the country. In every place you go, you see the same needs. All of the communities are experiencing the same consequences
D'accord.
of the situation. Well, we were saying that resilience is practical because it's a way of telling society you just have to fend for yourselves. But what would it take for them not have to be so resilient or force them to dig deep in their family relationships, their survival instincts, their ingenuity, their resourcefulness in their daily lives, rather than being able to rely on or count on perhaps a state? A state, or is it a state, or is it justice? Because when
le film, enfin, je me dis, mais
we see the film,
les gens ne seront jamais jugés.
all of the characters or the people who speak say these people have never been held to account. Nobody's been tried. A strong state is something different. It means police, taxes. Do people want that? Is that what people want? I don't know, Andrea. What should you start with? Or, and what about this word accountability, which is not easy to translate into French? What should we start with? That's a big question. But before I answer that, I was going back to this, the idea that we were talking about before, because I've started to write down my thoughts. But it's so complex and so rooted in history. I was writing about how the country was divided during the Taif agreement period, how things were done in Lebanon, which villages are Druze, which villages are Christian, which villages are... And we grew up in this kind of system. We don't have history books that cover this. My parents didn't tell me much about the Civil War. I just realized recently how old my mother was during the Civil War. She had said so little about it that I didn't understand what it meant, how it affected her. It comes out sometimes in the things she says, her reactions. And imposing, it's not what I would say. When we talk about policy or politics, there's the authorities, there's the economy. So I wouldn't talk about that. I would talk about the people and how the system changes the way we approach things. So collaboration is a big problem. Before we look for any solutions, we need to be able to talk to each other and work together. Perhaps meet. Yes, well, during the revolution, that for me was the most precious thing. We were all together. We were all out in the street. I met people from everywhere. I was out every day from morning to evening. I really wanted to try to understand and meet the people of my country. I didn't know my country. I remember that there was one time during the revolution where I sat down and I looked around me because I was a French speaker. I was in a French school. I learned the history of France before I learned the history of my own country. I knew about European geography. I knew much more about that than the geography of the Middle East. And in some ways, I didn't even feel Lebanese. So when I saw all the people around me in the street, and I realized this is Lebanon, all of us together, we were colonized. So many people from everywhere. And then there are the politicians and the warlords. Those who led the Civil War are now in power. So we're living in a country where we have to fight every day to have water, electricity, even just to be able to drive or have a place where you can walk, a green space in Beirut. So there's the romantic side, yes, but then there's the exhausting side. I was accepted in a program in Berlin. I went to Berlin, and all I wanted to do was go out and sit in a park. So yes, I think that meeting places are what we're lacking. We don't have public spaces. The street has become the public space where we meet, where we say, I'm sick and tired of this.
Merci.
Thank you. I think it's time to give the audience a chance to ask their questions. There are roving mics, and if you have a question, you can raise your hand. Please keep your questions short so that everyone who wants to ask a question will have time to do so. And please stand when you speak and keep your questions short. Would someone like to start the ball rolling?
Sinon, on continue le débat.
Otherwise, we can just keep on discussing with the panelists. I don't see any hands up. There's one over there.
Je vois quelqu'un en rouge.
Okay, gentleman in red.
I won't stand up.
Yes, can you stand up when you speak, please?
No, I won't. I'm using a wheelchair.
Ah, sorry, I'm really sorry.
No problem. So I have the question of, I think you brought it up already as about the state and the dysfunctional state. I think in the Middle East, there are, like with the Kurdish revolution, with Rojava, there's an alternative proposition of how society could look like that is not organized as the state as we know it. So I wonder how, from Lebanese perspective, how you look on this whole thing, if this reflection is there or, yeah.
Thank you. Peter, là, c'est une question pour toi.
Peter, I think that question is for you.
L'analisation, qui est le principe de gouvernance du Rojava, et
Could the Rojava principle work in Lebanon? On the same subject, the interesting part of the film, an interesting part of the film, is the elections. After the disastrous management of the explosion, the banking crisis, everybody lost their pensions and their savings, and the disastrous management of the COVID crisis. But despite all of that, most Lebanese people voted for the same political groups. The same breakdown came out of that election. I don't think we should blame the Lebanese people for the fate they've suffered. In Lebanon, I think you're quite wary of the state. It's a concept that hasn't worked. In the 1970s, for 7 or 8 years, there was an experiment with a new form of state government, of state building, but it was quite superficial, even though the trappings of the state, of a state, are there, subverted by a number of political and economic players who are working together often. So I think it's important to note that Lebanese people are wary of the state, wary of each other, a long history of inter-community quarrels and conflicts. So if you want to come up with alternatives, you have to build trust. And the chain of crises, makes this difficult. Efforts have been made in this direction, but if you look at the popular revolution in 2019, it tapered out in just a few days, mostly because of the wariness and mistrust between the various groups in the spontaneous popular movement. So just to look at the other side of this argument, although in Lebanon we're worried we don't like the collective, there is a form of extraordinary solidarity, extremely inspiring and massive, but it's invisible. So that's quite paradoxical in a society which is also very flamboyant, bling bling. But there's a form of redistribution, I'm not talking about wealth, redistribution of wealth from the wealthy to the poor, not at all, but within the middle class and from the middle class to the lower classes. There are many, many forms of this. Nobody brags about it. Nobody talks about it. There are a lot of women who cut their hair and donate their hair to make wigs for cancer patients. all sorts of scholarships are created for students, and any family who can afford to will pay into these scholarship funds so that less fortunate families can send their children to the same schools. And I could go on and on. A lot of elderly or vulnerable people are cared for by people in the neighborhood. Somebody brings them food. People chip in to buy their medication for them. I could go on and on. So for me, this is the most moving aspect of the society that I have witnessed, but also the least easy to see. I think that this is the aspect that the Lebanese would not think of boasting about. So for me, there is a wealth of resources that are not necessarily taken into consideration and that could be used to rebuild trust at whatever level.
Thank you very much. I think the Euro-Java experience is the result of a long-armed and political struggle, and it's hard to apply solutions from one place to another place. And it's exactly what made Lebanon suffer with a political system that was a replica of European systems that did not work very well in a country with such religious rifts, which is extremely complicated. Are there any other questions? We've got time. I think there are two at the back of the room. What I'd suggest is that we take them one after the other. Yes, I have a question for each and every single panelist. I'd like to know, if you had a magic wand and you could change absolutely everything, what would you do? Thank you. Let's take a second question immediately, since you're right next to each other.
Non? D'accord. Donc la baguette magique.
No? No second question? So the question about the magic wand. That's a question for you, Sabyl. You're an author. Well, I hope my answer is not just fiction. I'd create a Palestinian state so that we can move on in the region and do something else.
C'est bien.
Great. Good answer. What about you? I had never thought about having a magic wand before. I would change the reality of many communities that are suffering, that are experiencing great distress. And I'd say they're all the invisible wars, people's mental health. Yes, there is resilience, but the price to pay is high, and it's really hard to find solutions to this. So if I were to be able to do something with magic wand, I would give the people we serve a long-term solution to help their mental health. Andrea? Oh, that's a tough question. The one thing I thought that came to my mind is that I would change what we feel is significant as humans, our values, so that we highlight culture and rather than money, wealth. What about you, Peter? What would you do with magic wand in Lebanon? I would make this kind of a panel disappear. That's what I'd do. I'd like to come back to what Andrea said. People need to be able to catch their breath. If we could give them this opportunity, that would be great. And I really liked what she said about bodies, and that's something I mentioned in relation to the port explosion. But the war was also an experience for everybody's senses that is hard to explain. New weapons that are used, and I experienced the great number of different wars. We've reached a level of violence that is hard to conceptualize, but the body has a hard time recovering from them. So if I could use this magic wand to free people from this effect, I would do so.
Moi, si j'ajoutais la mienne,
I could add my idea. I'd like all the people who left Lebanon for bad reasons. You can have many good reasons to leave Lebanon, because you fall in love, because you want to travel, because you want to change your life, change your environment. But some people have left Lebanon for poor reasons, because they didn't have a job, they had no prospects.
pas de système dans lequel
Because the system that was there did not enable them to live properly and study what they wanted,
faire vivre toute une famille qui a
not just because they have to make money to sustain an entire family. Well, I'd like all these people not to have any reason to leave their country if they love their country and if they want to stay there.
on approche un peu de la
That's it. I think we're nearing the end of this session. I don't know whether there's one last question from the audience. I think we've got about 1 minute left. If not, don't hesitate to approach the filmmakers as they offered before the movie. Don't hesitate to approach our panelists. I'd like to thank Andrea Fahed for having joined us online.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Hajjar et à Caritas.
Thank you, Dina, Hajjar, and Caritas for all the work they do and for having been with us this evening, participated to this panel. Thanks to Sabyl Ghoussoub. You'll be able to find his book right after the end of this session, and he'll be available to sign it. And thanks to Peter for having traveled all the way from Lebanon, where he's an honorary citizen.